The clang of the school bell was just another harsh note in a symphony of discord that Elias learned to mute. In crowded classrooms, where laughter and chatter bounced off walls like errant tennis balls, he remained an island of stillness. In the cacophony of the lunchroom, amidst the clatter of trays and the shouts of adolescent energy, his head would be bowed over a notebook, not with words, but with intricate sketches of fantastical creatures or the delicate architecture of a leaf he'd found on the walk to school. His fingers, long and slender even then, would tap silent rhythms on the worn formica tabletops, a secret percussion only he could hear. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe quiet genius always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Teachers, well-meaning but overburdened, often scribbled, withdrawn, or needs to participate more on his report cards. His peers, caught in their own orbits of social navigation, simply overlooked him, a shadow in the periphery. No one thought to ask what melodies unfurled in the quiet spaces he inhabited, what symphonies played out in the auditorium of his mind. His silence wasn't empty, it was full of notes waiting to be played, of harmonies yearning for release. The true geography of his world wasn't mapped by the school's hallways or the cracked pavement of his neighborhood, but by the 88 keys of an old, upright piano tucked into the corner of his grandmother's small living room. There, behind closed doors, with the scent of lemon polish and old wood filling the air, Elias wasn't withdrawn. He was deeply engaged, chasing a beauty that shimmered just beyond his fingertips, note by painstaking note. This quiet boy, lost in the music only he seemed to truly hear, was on a path few could have predicted. The stage at Carnegie Hall, bathed in a reverent spotlight, awaited him, though he didn't know it yet. The quiet wasn't a flaw. It was merely the prelude. But what happened next would change everything. Elias Thorne lived in a world sculpted by sound, though much of it was internal. The external world was often a barrage, a noisy distraction from the intricate compositions that bloomed in his mind. His early years were a tapestry woven with the city's hum, the distant wail of sirens, the rhythmic rumble of the elevated train, the percussive beat of rain against the windowpane. But it was the silence he cultivated, the spaces between the noise, where his true self resided. He learned to listen not just with his ears, but with his whole being, feeling the vibrations of the world as if they were musical notes. His grandmother, Mama Rose, was the keeper of his quiet flame. Her apartment, small but filled with the warmth of generations, housed the upright piano, a relic from her own youth, its ivory keys yellowed like old photographs. It had been her husband's, Elias's grandfather, a man he only knew from faded pictures and Mama Rose's gentle stories, a man who also found solace in music. Mama Rose never pushed Elias to speak more, to come out of his shell, as others advised. She understood his language. She saw the way his eyes lit up when he discovered a new chord, the way his body swayed almost imperceptibly when a melody took hold of him. She'd hum old gospel tunes while she cooked, and Elias, from the age of 5, would try to pick them out on the piano, his small fingers stumbling at first, then finding their way with an intuition that startled her. She saved what little she could from her pension to ensure the piano stayed tuned, a quiet investment in his silent passion. She was his anchor, his first audience, the one who heard the music in his quietude long before anyone else did. The antagonist in Elias's early life wasn't a single person but a pervasive system of misunderstanding. At a parent-teacher conference when Elias was in 3rd grade, Mrs. Albright, his teacher, had spoken with concern. "He's a sweet boy, Miss Thorne," she'd said, her voice kind but firm, "but he's just not present. He's in his own world. His scores are fine, but he doesn't engage. We need him to participate." Mama Rose had nodded, her gaze soft but unwavering. "Elias participates in his own way, Mrs. Albright. He sees and hears things differently." The comment, though not meant unkindly, was a small, sharp stone in the path, a reminder of how the world often misinterpreted his depth as a deficit. Later, a group of older boys, noticing his solitary habit of tapping rhythms on a park bench, had jeered, "Look at the little weirdo, playing his air drums." Elias had simply lowered his head, the rhythm faltering for a moment before resuming, a little quieter, a little more hidden. The sounds of his home were a counterpoint to the school's harshness. The sizzle of greens in a pan, the soft thud of Mama Rose's Bible on the nightstand, the creak of the floorboards that sang their own ancient song. And above all, the piano. Its wood, scarred and faded, felt like a trusted friend under his touch. The keys, cool and smooth, were extensions of his own thoughts. He didn't just play notes. He coaxed stories from them, painted landscapes with sound. Mama Rose would often sit in her worn armchair, her eyes closed, a gentle smile on her lips as Elias played. She'd say, "That's your grandpa talking through you, child." He had that same touch. It was in those moments, with the aroma of her sweet potato pie mingling with the rich tones of the piano, that Elias felt truly seen, truly understood. He was learning, in the sanctuary of his grandmother's love, that his potential was a deep, quiet river, its surface calm, its current powerful. The shift began subtly, not with a grand gesture, but with a new arrival at his struggling middle school. Mr. Henderson was a young music teacher, fresh out of college, his enthusiasm a bright, unexpected chord in the school's often muted atmosphere. He'd inherited a classroom with mismatched instruments and a budget that barely covered sheet music, but he carried a belief in the transformative power of music that was infectious. During a free period, Mr. Henderson was trying to coax a melody from the school's battered upright piano in the corner of the auditorium, a far cry from Mama Rose's cherished instrument, when he heard a hesitant cough. Elias stood in the doorway, clutching a worn Bach prelude, the paper softened at the edges from countless hours of study. Can I try?" Elias asked, his voice barely a whisper, the request almost lost in the cavernous room. Mr. Henderson, surprised to see the boy known for his silence, smiled warmly. "Of course. Be my guest." Elias sat, his posture immediately transforming. The hesitancy vanished, replaced by a focused intensity. His fingers, which had seemed so restless tapping on desks, now moved with a grace and precision that belied his age. He began to play, not the Bach he held, but a simple, melancholic melody of his own creation. It was a piece full of longing and a quiet, resilient beauty. Mr. Henderson listened, stunned. The notes filled the dusty auditorium, each one clear, deliberate, imbued with an emotion that was astonishingly mature. He had seen the withdrawn label on Elias's file. He had heard the other teacher's well-meaning concerns. But what he heard now was a voice, powerful and eloquent, speaking a language that needed no words. When Elias finished, a profound silence hung in the air before Mr. Henderson finally spoke, his voice hushed with awe. "Elias, that was extraordinary." For the first time in a long time, Elias met someone's gaze directly, a flicker of surprise and then a dawning hope in his own eyes. He had been heard. The hours of solitary practice, the silent symphonies in his mind, the legacy of his grandfather's touch, it all converged in that moment. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Thank you." Mr. Henderson became Elias's quiet champion. He didn't try to change Elias's reserved nature, but instead provided him with opportunities to let his music speak. He found more complex pieces for Elias, introduced him to composers he'd never heard of, and spent his own lunch breaks listening to Elias play, offering gentle guidance. He encouraged Elias to enter a citywide youth talent competition. The idea terrified Elias. Playing for Mama Rose or Mr. Henderson was one thing. Playing for a room full of strangers, judges, was another. The memory of the boys in the park, the sting of Mrs. Albright's well-meaning concern, it all rushed back. But Mr. Henderson, with quiet persistence, and Mama Rose, with her unwavering faith, gently urged him forward. "Your music deserves to be heard, child," Mama Rose had said, her hand on his shoulder. "Don't let fear keep your gift locked away." The day of the competition was a blur of anxiety. The backstage area was noisy, filled with other contestants exuding a confidence Elias couldn't fathom. When his name was called, his legs felt like lead. Walking onto the stage, the lights felt blindingly hot. He sat at the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting his own apprehensive face. For a moment, his mind went blank. The silence of the expectant audience pressed in on him. Then, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and thought of Mama Rose's living room, the scent of lemon polish, the feel of the familiar keys under his fingers. He began to play a Chopin nocturne, a piece that spoke of melancholy and hope. His initial nervousness gave way to immersion. The auditorium, the judges, the other contestants, they all faded away. There was only the music flowing through him from him. When he finished, there was a beat of stunned silence, then applause, hesitant at first, then growing, swelling into a genuine ovation. He hadn't won first place that day, that went to a technically proficient but less soulful violinist. But he had won something more valuable, the understanding that his music could connect, could move people. He received an honorable mention, and one of the judges, a stern-faced woman from the local conservatory, sought him out afterwards. "Young man," she said, her expression unreadable, "you have a rare gift. But it's raw. You need discipline, formal training." Her words were a challenge, not a dismissal. The judge's words spurred Mr. Henderson to find ways to get Elias more formal instruction. He discovered a retired concert pianist, Madame Dubois, who lived in a quieter part of the city and occasionally took on promising students, often pro bono if she saw true potential. Convincing her to even meet Elias was a hurdle. Her reputation was formidable, her standards exacting. Mr. Henderson wrote a letter, then called, then practically begged. Finally, she agreed to an audition, but her tone was skeptical. "Another hopeful, Mr. Henderson? Most have enthusiasm, few have the necessary grit, the soul." The audition was in her grand, antique-filled apartment, a world away from Elias's home. Madame Dubois, with her silver hair coiled tightly and eyes that missed nothing, watched Elias with an unnerving intensity as he sat at her perfectly tuned Steinway. He played a Bach fugue, its complex architecture demanding both technical skill and intellectual understanding. He made a small error midway, a finger slipping, and for a moment, his heart sank. He saw a flicker in Madame Dubois's eyes. But he recovered, pushing through, finishing the piece with the quiet passion that was his signature. When he was done, Madame Dubois was silent for a long time, tapping a perfectly manicured finger against her chin. Elias waited, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "You have feeling, boy," she finally said, her French accent precise. "And your hands, they understand the keys. But you are untamed, wild, like a garden left to grow whichever way it pleases. Beautiful in its own way, perhaps, but lacking structure, discipline." Elias braced himself for rejection. "However," she continued, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, "a wild garden can sometimes produce the most interesting blooms. We will work. Hard. Very hard. You will practice until your fingers ache, and then you will practice more. Do you understand?" Elias, overwhelmed and relieved, could only nod. This was the beginning of a new, rigorous chapter. Madame Dubois was demanding, critical, pushing him past limits he didn't know he had. There were days he left her apartment feeling utterly discouraged, the weight of her expectations immense. But he always returned. He practiced for hours, the music becoming his entire world, the discipline shaping his raw talent into something more refined, more powerful. Mama Rose watched, her pride a quiet glow. Mr. Henderson checked in, always encouraging. The dream of Carnegie Hall began as a whisper, a fantastical notion sparked by a poster Madame Dubois had on her wall, a relic from her own performing days. It seemed an impossible peak, a distant star. But Madame Dubois, for all her strictness, saw the scale of his potential. She began to speak of prestigious competitions, programs that could, if he excelled, lead to such stages. The stakes grew. It wasn't just about playing beautifully anymore. It was about precision, interpretation, and conveying a depth of understanding that could impress the most discerning ears. There were setbacks. An audition for a youth orchestra where he was told his style was too introspective and that he lacked stage presence. The comment stung, a familiar echo of past dismissals. For a few days, the music in him felt muted, his confidence shaken. He'd sit at Mama Rose's piano, his fingers listless on the keys. Mama Rose would simply place a cup of tea beside him. "The world ain't always kind to quiet souls, Elias," she said one evening, her voice gentle. "But that don't mean their song ain't worth singing. You play for yourself first, for the love of it. The rest will follow if it's meant to." Her words, and the unwavering belief in Madame Dubois's demanding gaze, pulled him back. He recommitted, his determination hardening. Then came the news of the National Young Virtuosos competition. The grand prize, a scholarship and a debut performance at Carnegie Hall. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a terrifying, exhilarating prospect. Madame Dubois believed he was ready, but only if he was willing to give it everything. For months, Elias lived and breathed music. He chose a program that showcased both his technical prowess and his unique emotional depth, a fiendishly difficult Liszt etude and, daringly, an original composition he'd been working on for years, a piece born from his own quiet world. Full of intricate rhythms and soaring, melancholic melodies, a piece he called Prelude to a Dawn. The pressure was immense. There were moments of doubt, nights when the music felt like an insurmountable wall. But the thought of that stage, of sharing his truest voice in such a revered space, pushed him onward. The journey to New York City with Mama Rose and Mr. Henderson, both of whom had pooled their meager resources to accompany him, was filled with a nervous excitement. This wasn't just his dream anymore. It was theirs too. The day of the final round at Carnegie Hall itself was almost surreal. The sheer history of the place, the ghosts of musical giants who had graced its stage, was palpable. Backstage, the air crackled with tension. Elias felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He clutched a small, worn photograph of his grandfather, a man he'd never met but felt connected to through the shared language of the piano. When his name was finally called, he walked onto the legendary stage. The vast, plush velvet sea of the auditorium stretched before him, hushed and expectant. A single, bright spotlight found him, isolating him with the gleaming black expanse of the concert grand. For a fleeting second, the old labels echoed in his mind, withdrawn in his own world. He saw, in his mind's eye, the dismissive faces of teachers, the taunting smirks of peers, the skeptical gaze of the conservatory judge. He sat at the piano, took a breath, closed his eyes. He wasn't just Elias Thorne, the quiet boy from the inner city. He was a conduit for something larger. He began with the list, his fingers flying across the keys with a dazzling ferocity and precision that made the complex passages sound effortless. He poured all his discipline, all of Madame Du Bois's exacting training, into every note. The audience, initially perhaps surprised by his unassuming presence, was now utterly captivated. Then, a brief pause. He shifted, collecting himself. It was time for his own piece, Prelude to a Dawn. As his fingers touched the keys, a different energy filled the hall. This was not just technical brilliance. This was his soul laid bare. The music swelled, intricate and deeply personal, speaking of solitude, of quiet observation, of the beauty found in unexpected places. It was the sound of his inner world, finally given its full voice. He played with a vulnerability that was breathtaking, each note a testament to his journey, a refutation of every doubt, every dismissal. In those moments, he wasn't just playing the piano. He was telling his story, the story of a quiet boy who heard music in the silence. When the final note of Prelude to a Dawn faded, an absolute, profound silence descended upon Carnegie Hall. It stretched, heavy and resonant. Elias kept his head bowed for a moment, his chest heaving, the echo of the music still vibrating within him. Then, it began, a single clap, then another, and then the entire hall erupted. Thunderous applause, cheers, a standing ovation that washed over him like a wave. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes slightly dazed, and looked out. He saw Mama Rose in the audience, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Beside her, Mr. Henderson was beaming, clapping wildly. Even the judges, usually impassive, were on their feet, their expressions ones of deep admiration. He had done it. The quiet wasn't a flaw. It was his strength, the source of his unique, powerful music. In the immediate, ringing aftermath, as he took his bows, a sense of profound peace settled over Elias. He caught Mama Rose's eye, and a small, rare smile touched his lips. Backstage, the congratulations were overwhelming, but it was the quiet words of the lead judge, a world-renowned conductor, that resonated most. "Young man," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect, shaking Elias's hand firmly, "your music, your composition, it's a revelation. You have a remarkable future." Later that evening, the announcement came. Elias Thorne was the winner. The scholarship, the debut. It was real. Holding the award, a simple, elegant plaque, he felt the weight of it, not as a burden, but as an affirmation. This wasn't just a victory for him, but for all the quiet dreamers, for everyone who had ever felt overlooked. Mama Rose hugged him tightly, her embrace conveying more than words ever could. "Your grandpa would be so proud, child," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You played your heart out for him, for all of us." The journey had been long, the silence often misinterpreted, but tonight, his music had spoken volumes. He stood for a moment by the stage door, looking back at the darkened hall, the faint scent of dust and dreams lingering in the air. The quiet that surrounded him now was different. It was not the quiet of isolation, but the quiet of profound, earned contentment. A new prelude was beginning. This is what it looks like when a quiet genius finds his voice, not in words, but in the universal language of music, proving that the deepest emotions often resonate from the stillest waters. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.